Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to be showing you how to paint one of the Ironskull's boys from Warhammer Underworlds Shadespire. You can obviously use this method to paint your guys for Age of Sigmar 2, or you can adapt it to use for other game systems. Before I get started, if this is your first time here, thanks for watching. Why not consider clicking the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the 5 uploads I do every week, and especially my Friday painting videos. First off, we're going to prime the model white. This is just to make sure that we keep the colours on top of it nice and bright. The first stage is we're going to start with Averland Sunset, and we're going to paint this all over the armour. Make sure you thin this down with a little water, as it makes the yellow a little more transparent and helps some of the brightness of the white lighten the colour of the yellow. Here you can see all of the areas of armour that I've done, so once you've done all of that, let it dry and we'll move on to the next stage. Next I take Abaddon Black, and we're going to paint in the trouser cloth material, the straps across his shoulders, and also the strapping around his waist and down his back. Just try and be nice and neat with this, and then once it's all done, leave it to dry and we'll move on to the next stage. The next step is I take Leadbelcher, and I use this to paint all of the chainmail on the model. I also use it to paint the axe in his hand. Again, thin this down a little as it helps to flow into the recesses of the chainmail. Once you've done all of that, we'll come back and do the next step. Now I'm going to paint the little patches that are on his armour, and I'm going to use the Fang to do this. I just think that this colour is a nice contrast with the yellow. You can vary up some of your models by painting some of the areas of armour in this colour too, as it helps to keep them cohesive without looking too similar. As always, just try and be nice and neat. Once it's dry, we'll move on to the next step. Now I'm going to take Reikland Fleshshade, and I'm going to wash this over all areas of the yellow armour. This Fleshshade has a bit of a browny orangey tone to it, and it really does look good as a shade on the yellow. Cover over all of that yellow armour, and once it's dry, we can move on. Now as you can see, this has toned down the colour of the yellow and it's much more of an orangey brown now. So we're going to take Lamenters yellow and we're going to paint it over all of the armour again, and this will help brighten it up and give it a much more yellowy tone to it. Once it's all done, the Reikland Fleshshade in the recesses will really give you some shading, and the Lamenters yellow on the high points will really bring it back up. Again, leave it to dry fully before we move on to the next step. Next I'm going to take Beil-tan Green, and we're going to use this to paint his flesh. This is a wash that seems to stain the white undercoat and gives a really good highlight and shade without too much effort. Just be very careful around the mouth area, as we want to keep those teeth nice and white at this stage, and then once you've covered all of the flesh, make sure it is fully dry before you move on. Now I'm going to take Gorthor Brown, and I'm going to paint the fur pelt that is hanging from his shoulder, and I'm also going to use it to paint all of the base. Just try and avoid the stones and rocks and the little bit of broken branch that's on there as well, as we'll come back and do them in the next step. Now I'm going to take Dawnstone, and I'm going to use this to paint the rocks. Just take your time with this and try not to get any onto the armour, as it's a little bit more difficult to fix any mistakes at this stage. Next up I take Rhinox Hide, and I'm using that to paint the broken branch. You can obviously go into a little bit more detail with this, using a little bit of dry brushing or a bit of highlighting, but for this I'm just keeping it pretty simple, and I think this looks effective enough to get these onto the table quickly. Next I'm taking Agrax Earthshade, and I'm using this to wash over all of the weapon and also over all of the base. If you do find it pulling a little too much, just try and wick it away with a dry brush and move it around. You don't want too much on so that it drops onto your painted model. As always with these washes, make sure they're fully dry before you move to the next stage. Now I'm going to take Runefang Steel, and I'm going to dry brush it over all of the axe in his hand. As you can see, this is the light silver that's picking up on the high spots, giving a really good metallic-y feel to it. I'm also going to use this to dry brush lightly over the chainmail. Still using the Runefang Steel and a small brush, we're going to pick out some of the battle damage on the armour. So here you can just see I'm putting really thin lines around the edges of some of that damage. Leaving the wash in the recesses gives a lot of depth to the model, and just very carefully picking out that damage makes it look like some of the paint is chipped off and gives the eye something to focus on. With this method, less is definitely more, so don't overdo it. Keep those brush strokes nice and thin, and this will give you a much better effect at the end. We're getting close to the end now, and we're going to use Wild Rider Red to pick out his eyes. Again, just use a small brush. Here I'm using a size 0, and just go very carefully. It's much easier to go back and add a little more than it is to have to try and tidy up where you've made a mistake. Next I've taken Ulthuan Grey, and I'm going to pick out the tooth that is hanging from his shoulder, and we're also going to very lightly brush over the tips of the teeth to pick them out and brighten it up from where we've put the Agrax Earthshade. The last stage then is just to paint the rim of the base. You can obviously paint it in any colour that you'd like. Here I'm using Abaddon Black, and this is just to tidy it up, and I think sometimes a black base really does just give the model that little bit more of a pop. You can use variances on this method to keep your warband looking cohesive without looking too similar, but I think you'll agree it gets them onto the table very quickly in a pretty good standard. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.